Never hire a real estate agent if you can't trust their recommendations.
What was your essential everyday carry for a home inspection when you first started? Do you feel that the evolution of tools in our trade has shifted the inspector's process? Hi everybody, and welcome to the official first episode of the Inspection Report. I'm your co-host, Jed Deal, and today I'm joined by your other co-host, Tim Netzley. We're both professional inspectors, but with some pretty varying degrees on how long we've been in this profession. So I thought it would be good to bring Tim on today to sort of speak to the evolution of the industry since he's been in it for as long as he has. And I'm not trying to call you old, Tim, but...
Just comes natural.
Right. But yeah, that's the goal of today, is to sort of get some insight as to the industry and where it's been and where it's going through your experience. I guess first off, giving you an opportunity as a guest / co-host to sort of introduce yourself and where you're coming from.
I'm Tim Netzley, Certified Master Inspector, also Codes Certified Inspector, and been at it for 24 years since May of 2001, so exactly 24 years. And a lot has changed in that 24 years. In fact, when I first started, most people seemed to not know what a home inspector was in the Northwest. So I had a cousin who was in California, had been doing it for a while, had an inspection outfit there, and he was actually my first instructor on how to get into it. I was interested in it even before that, but when I started in Eastern Washington, it was an unheard of profession for the most part. So business was very slow back then.
Mm-hmm. So was that just not very many people requesting inspections at that time, just across the board? And was that due to a lack of information on its importance, or where do you think that, why was that an unknown profession at the time?
Well, I think real estate transactions had been happening for a long time, you know, but in the way that we do them now, not much has changed in the real estate transaction. Some may argue that, you know, laws and this and that have, but for the most part, the fundamentals haven't. Two realtors involved, you know, sometimes one realtor involved, but nevertheless, they take care of everything. But what they don't know, often anyway, is the construction and the ins and outs of how homes are put together, homes and buildings are put together. So since it was not something that was really an option for a long time, a lot of people just didn't think about it, I think. And so in California, I think, is where it started, if I recall, and it wasn't very long before 24 years ago. It was probably 45 years ago or so, and even then it was a slow start there too. So I don't think it was a neglected option. I think it just wasn't an option in most people's minds.
Right. Who do you think primarily filled that void? I mean, I'm sure people, even with real estate agents on both sides, were looking to somebody for guidance. I mean, it's a pretty big investment. Was that void filled by, you know, dads and, you know, friends, uncles, who were contractors?
Grandpa, or the friend, my friend down the street, you know, or whatever, yeah.
Right.
I mean, if there were those questions, as there should have been, then they'd pick whomever they could think of that had any experience relative to what the issue was. The problem, of course, is electricians are great at electrical, and plumbers are great at plumbing, and carpenters are great at carpentry, but a lot of those trades are unknown outside of your specified trade. So.
Right. That's the argument I hear a lot about, against home inspectors in general, is just, I'm gonna, you know, if I ever buy a house, I'm gonna hire an electrician, a HVAC specialist, a roofer, a general contractor. You know, I'm gonna hire all of these trade experts in their individual fields. I mean, I think the most glaring errors of that are that of timing and finances, right? And so as inspectors, we're very much generalists when it comes to this. Did you feel that the early days inspectors were seen as generalists like they are now, or were guys going into it with sort of specific trade backgrounds, and then maybe they were, you know, excellent in one area and not so much in others?
Well, in that class I took from my cousin 24 years ago, he warned, since I was an electrician, he warned me about that. He said, you're going to want to pick on everything electrical and end up being electrical heavy in your commentary, and not as much on the others. But I think most inspectors early on came out of the trades at some point, or were doing it alongside the trades. I did it alongside the trades for quite a long time. I had an interest in all the trades. So the problem with hiring an electrician or a plumber, there's several actually, not that they're not good at looking at their stuff, and not that they wouldn't know a little bit at least about the others, is that they often don't pay much attention, or maybe don't know about the building science and how all of those systems have to function together. And so you call us generalists, and yes, because we don't specialize in any one of these fields necessarily, but we are specialists in the sense that we should be anyway, that where we can see how all of these specialty trades have to complement one another for an organic system to happen for any home or building.
Right. Yeah, I often hear of homes being considered by inspectors as systems of systems, right? And oftentimes where the issues arise are the pain points, or those interaction points between two different systems that, like you're saying, may not be identified as problematic by any individual tradesman within their specific field, but bring in a different type of specialist in a home inspector who has more of an eye for those pain points where things come together.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk about report writing in general. I've heard nowadays everything is so streamlined with online reports. I'm filling out my report as I go through the inspection on my phone, adding pictures, videos, and oftentimes we're able to get clients their report, almost certainly the same day, sometimes within hours after their inspection walkthrough is done with us. But I assume that's not where it all started.
No, you and I, in fact, we like to publish the report before we leave the property. And that was only a dream, if even ever considered possible 24 years ago. We had things in their burgeoning state like Microsoft Word and those more. We had moved on from DOS, but we had, and so we had some more accessible applications along those lines. But really, the inspection report, anybody's samples out there, or any formatted report that you could purchase and reuse or learn from, was carbon copies on a clipboard. And there were no photos involved. There was none of that. So it was an inspector walking around the house, walking through the house, and check marks and making notes. And I quickly moved out of that and created my own template, and that I could feed into Microsoft Word. But it took, it might take me 4 hours to do the inspection. It'd take me 6 hours to write the report.
Right. Yeah.
There was no 2-a-days back then, and some inspectors now are 3-a-days.
Right.
And even now, with all the conveniences, I don't know how you can do 3-a-days unless they're small.
Right.
And still deliver a quality product.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, I can't imagine spending that much time outside of the inspection getting the same job done, but a luxury of the new age, I suppose.
Back in my day.
Right. For me as an inspector, being able to utilize videos and photos in my report, and this is kind of how I train guys under me, is the report itself is such an opportunity for the inspector to show their work, to show how thorough they were, even if it's just documentation photos. I went up, I'm showing you that I went up into the attic. Here's the photos of the attic. Here's photos of all the hard to reach places in the crawl space. Even if I don't find anything that's necessarily a defect, the report's an opportunity for me to show my work to the client.
Yeah.
Right? At the time, was it just kind of the natural limitation and you didn't think about it too much? Or did it always feel like your carbon copy report with no photos, just kind of handwritten, checked boxes and whatnot? Did you feel like you were able to really show the client what you really did on the property?
So today we often have inspections where we never meet the client in person. Yeah. We talk to them on the phone, but a lot of times they can't show up, or they're out-of-state buyers, and people are moving so much more around the country from state to state than they were before, I think. But that notwithstanding, in those days, the essential part in my mind then and even now was the walkthrough with the client, because I don't care how good your report is, whether it was carbon copies and checking boxes and making notes, or now where we have photos and videos and everything web-based and digital. However good or bad your report is, it's not going to tell the whole story. Really having that face-to-face interaction and being able to point and touch things and walk them through that is essential, I think. But more so then than it was now. I mean, now it's a lot easier with the videos and such to walk through with your client virtually, but it's still, I think, is a poor replacement, poor substitution. Then it was very essential, because a lot of times, since the inspectors, especially since they came out of the trades, they'd speak a different language than the client.
Right. Just talking about gear for a second, just like reports have changed so much over the years as far as the material used and the methodology. What was your essential everyday carry for a home inspection when you first started versus all of the stuff we bring in our cars with us now?
And I don't say this, but I hear some say, still you don't. Well, you only need a ladder, a flashlight, and a screwdriver, right? And some will say we don't even need a screwdriver, but
can't get controversial here.
Yeah, well, that was gonna. The essential toolkit back then was hand tools and a ladder. By hand tools, I mean, a screwdriver and a flashlight and maybe a pry bar or certain things that would come up normally, but we didn't have cordless drills even.
Right.
Well, we did, but they were 10 pounds and this big.
Not realistic to throw in your tool belt.
No, I remember the Makita, the battery was like 3 pounds by itself, and it was this long, and it slid inside the handle, and that's impractical. So we didn't have cameras even. I remember when somebody made a camera, I don't remember who it was now, with a 4-inch screen on it and a movable lens, and every inspector around the country was just jonesing for this camera, and those that had it were talking about how wonderful it was for inspections, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh, that's amazing, and it's probably like 2 megapixels or something, but that was whiz bang back then, right? And now we do everything from our phones. It's pretty incredible. I remember part of that 6 hours or average on making that report was putting photos in when they finally did come around. I was always looking for that piece of software that would get us to the next level, that would make the job more efficient, easier, and more presentable to the client, and do a better job at illustrating what we're trying to say. So things have evolved very much so.
Right. Well, and there are tools now that are so, I mean, even a few years ago, I imagine they seemed pretty high tech for the inspection industry. I'm thinking of things like, thermal imaging and, everybody's carrying around a moisture meter. Everybody's got a drone in their car, for the circumstances where they can't walk the roof. Hopefully only for the circumstances where they can't walk the roof. I've always thought about things in terms of, technology is helpful as long as it's not limiting you from performing what's optimal, right? So with the drones, for example, it's pretty hard to argue that traversing the roof, getting eyes on things, and being that close to it is the optimal circumstance. Opting to just fly a drone over every roof is cheating, right? Yeah. In any circumstance where you can safely walk the roof, I think is not the right decision. I think it's not nearly as good of a service for your client that you're aiming to serve. But do you feel that the evolution of tools in our trade has shifted the inspector's process to a degree where they're more reliant on those technologies and less just put eyes on it, get to the hard to reach place And do you see a disconnect between traditional inspection ways of going about things, and is there an over-reliance on some of this technology?
Well, the danger with any technology is a growing complacency, because you can now do things from sitting down rather than getting into something that you need to. Mm-hmm. There's that danger, but I don't think any responsible inspector is allowing for that. You mentioned flying drones over roofs when you could be walking it. Mm-hmm. There are some inspectors that, well, every SOP of any of these organizations that any of us belong to says you don't have to walk a roof. But right. I think that is because in different parts of the country it's not always safe to walk a roof, and in different materials it's not always safe to walk a roof. Mm-hmm. And so not walking a roof has to be something that is not required in those cases. But that's where the drone comes in handy, where if, like where we're at, half the year at least the roof is frozen over. Right. Mm-hmm. And getting on the roof is going to take longer than getting off the roof in those cases. Right. Too often. Maybe we shouldn't say this for our insurance people. We've walked roofs in snow before, but but not in ice. But nevertheless, the technology allows us to get into places that we couldn't before. Mm-hmm. But there's always the danger of an over-reliance on those technologies, and rather than putting your own eyes on it, you're peering through a screen at it instead. And you can't pick up. Even with as clear as the photography is these days, you still can't pick up all the details that you can if you are walking the roof in this mm-hmm. case, or crawling a crawl space. I mean, we've got crawl space drones, we've got aerial drones, we've got the thermography, like you said, we've got all kinds of stuff now that help us, but they're designed to help us, not replace mm-hmm. the things that were done before. And thank God that these things have rolled out, these whiz-bang big game changers, as they mm-hmm. have all been determined at one point or another, have rolled out pretty much one at a time and over time, because 24 years, the cost of an inspection hasn't gone up very much, mm-hmm. but the cost of having an inspection business sure has, because of all these tools. As soon as one inspector, and this is true in any business, as soon as one offers this as a standard, whatever this is, then all the others are going to have to offer it, or they're going to lose business as well. And so, right. So thermography came in. Well, let's go back. Cameras came in, mm-hmm. and then thermography came in. Drones came in. Crawl bots, they still haven't picked up a whole lot of speed, at least where we're at, because most of our crawl spaces are crawlable. We only use them when we can't fit. Mm-hmm. You can fit in more of them than I can. But and now, the latest is now every inspector is going to have a sewer scope. Right. And these are things that we often went outside and found other people in professions that offered those services before, and the generalist, as we said before, is now having to have a little bit of everything tool-wise too, whereas to get a sewer scope done, we'd go find a plumber before, and now the inspector has to have one or two in right. their arsenal, right? Thermography, when it first came out, it was an extra that people were charging an extra for, mm-hmm. and some still do. But it's understandable, because it's expensive. The right. equipment is expensive. The training is expensive. Anybody can go buy a camera. Now, when those cameras first came out, they were $25,000 and $30,000. Now you can pick one up for $500. And it's better than the technology was in the $25,000, $30,000. But mm-hmm. that's just supply and demand kind of thing. So charging for those services makes sense from an output standpoint. You had to put out the cash to buy the equipment. You had to put out the cash to get educated to really know how to use the equipment. Like mm-hmm. I said, anybody can go buy one of these cameras, but not everybody really knows how to read it. Mm-hmm. You can say, yeah, this looks hot, and this is not. Right. But that's
right. What does that mean?
That doesn't. Exactly. You have to be able to interpolate the data there.
So, do you feel like there's a lot of pressure on inspectors these days versus when you first started to diversify their services, whether it's a technology like thermographic imaging that allows them to do something they couldn't before, or an environmental testing services, radon, mold, sewer scopes? It seems to me like there's probably a lot more pressure to diversify your business.
Well, most of those things we still do charge extra for, so they're equitable services. Not mm-hmm. all of them. I mean, we offer thermal imaging, at least on a basic level, they're included in all our reports, right? Mm-hmm. But we also have a thermography service that it goes into more detail and more depth. Because inspectors ourselves included, often charge more for those extra services. I think it's doable, but there is more pressure on the inspector to be able to do those things. And what we see too often is a lot of inspectors will go buy these things and not really know how to use them or know how to interpret the data that's coming in. But they know more than their client does, so they look like experts anyway. This industry has always been a very low entry threshold, and it's getting less so as far as what equipment you have to have, what education you should have. The oversight for that education is still pretty poor in most of the country. Not all, but most of it, and certainly is here in Montana. We've got a registration, they're talking about licensure, and that ensures continuing education, but proving ground, so to speak. There's not an apprenticeship as yet. We have one in-house. We, as you know, you went through it. We do our own apprenticeship because of that. But most inspectors out there predominantly are just one-man bands,
Right.
A one-person show. And so who's holding who accountable? Not much.
Right.
So that's a little far off the question. The short answer is yes, that threshold has been raised a little bit, but it's still, because of those other factors, it's still a pretty low entry threshold. And you see ads on social media all over the place that say, here's your side job, become a home inspector, or here's your new career, become a home inspector. And I was at that conference in Florida here recently, and I don't remember the number exactly, but I think it was pretty close to, or maybe it's a little over, 90% of the people that get into this industry get out of it within the first few years.
Yeah, I've heard that. I would assume a lot of that pressure to diversify your services, some of it comes from other inspectors kind of and the competition aspect, but also comes from client expectations and real estate professional expectations at this point. I think, the industry, the home inspection industry has evolved to a point to where the agent who's going to recommend you or the client who's going to select is looking for a one-stop shop, very much searching for that one phone call they need to make to sort of check all their boxes. And so if I just can't imagine in today's day and age as a home inspector, if somebody called you and wanted to, schedule an inspection with you and they said, well, we'd like to have, the radon tested and the sewer scoped and and wanted to make sure you did some thermography, and you just said, no, I actually don't do any of that. I can't imagine, in today's day and age, that conversation would go very well or last very long.
Yeah. Very seldom do we have a client that says, I don't want any of that stuff, just the regular, just the standard inspection. Very, very seldom. But that said, I think most of those shopping for a home inspector still don't know what they should be looking for, and very much rely on the reference from the realtor. The realtors, having a little more experience, most often know what they like and what they want, but they really, realtors are different across the board, like inspectors. You've got some who are in it for the service, and those are in it for the paycheck, and everywhere in between. Yep. So, but a conscientious realtor who's really out to serve their clients is going to be vetting their inspectors that they're referencing to their clients, of course, because anybody you reference carries your name with them too,
right,
real or perceived. What was the question?
No, I agree with what you're saying. What I always hate seeing on...
We have to let me finish that sentence.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise it's just hanging there. So the realtor who has some experience is going to be looking for the biggest convenience. They're also going to be vetting for the best service at the same time. Right. And there's going to be a balance between those. So a one-stop shop is fantastic if they can do the work. We ended up splitting our environmental testing services off into a whole new company because I thought it was distracting there wasn't real proof of this, but in my mind conceptually it was distracting our inspectors from what they're really there to do. And so the environmental testing, we ended up starting a different company and making that available to all the other inspection companies, and then and hiring them to come in and do that. Now, we're still a one-stop shop in the sense that we just let them know that, hey, we have an inspection and we need these things done, and that is also available to all the other inspection companies that want to broaden their own menu and scope to do that. But finding that one-stop shop who has everything in-house and one person doing all of that stuff, as like they say, if multitasking is really not doing anything well.
Right.
Kind of thing. So
Yep.
really, to do a proper building inspection, you need to be able to focus on what you're there for. And if you're trying to fit all these things into the few hours that you have with that building, then you're inevitably going to be distracted by just getting things done.
No, I tell you what, if on, and then, 2-a-day inspections, and you got one inspection on a 4,000 plus square foot house, and they want mold radon, sewer scope, and everything in between.
Well system check.
It can certainly add up and lead to a little bit of inspector anxiety from time to time, for sure.
Right. And that leads to a poorer job performance.
Right.
Inevitably. I mean, I don't know how you can not deal with that distraction and the products suffer.
Right. Going back to something you said a little bit earlier, you were commenting on realtors who recommend inspectors to their clients. And I've been meaning to ask you about this, but it seems like the general consensus online, and I don't even, sometimes it comes from inspectors, sometimes it comes from just, whatever random real estate Reddit page you happen to be looking at.
I don't even read Reddit.
Good. Yeah, there's no reason to be on there. But the general consensus from a lot of people is, never hire the inspector that your real estate agent recommends. And I can see where that comes from, because
never hire a real estate agent if you can't trust the recommendations.
That's the conclusion I've come to as well. Because if
you own the team as the buyer or the seller. You're hiring these consultants, real estate agent, inspector, contractors, whatever. You own the team, but the realtor is your team manager. So if you can't trust the team manager to manage the team, then you need a different team manager. Right. So I understand the sentiment. Yeah. But that plays into those realtors that are out there just for the paycheck and not for their clients' best interest. And we don't work with too many of those. Right. We come across them every once in a while, but most of the time it's not because that's their character necessarily. It's more because they're overwhelmed, brand new into this industry and trying to figure out how to make all this stuff work. And they've got, like anybody, they've got voices coming from all directions at them, and they're not sure how to get it done. And so they're just trying to get it done. Any of those that have been in the business for a little while that we have worked with seem to not be that way. They're out there for their client's best interest. And while I've heard that saying, I can't say that I've seen it practically play out too often.
I would agree. You have the opportunity to speak to the younger version of Tim, the inspector, when things are first starting. What kind of career advice as a upstart inspector might you be giving yourself? Well,
if we go back to those social media ads that encourage anybody to just give it a try, and say, was it Miyagi or was it Yoda? It said, do or do not, there is no try.
Definitely Yoda.
Yoda, okay.
Pretty sure. Well,
I'd say
people sending us emails, that it's neither or something. But
well, people have to be watching to send us emails.
That's right. Yeah, that's optimistic.
Yeah, I'd say do it or don't. Back then when I started, there was nearly zero for education on how to do this. Now, especially with InterNACHI, they have an accredited school. There's no excuse for not getting educated. There are in-person classes all over the country. There are online classes abundant. There's no real excuse for not going all in. And so I'd say go all in or stay out. The problem is because it's such a low entry threshold, we've got those who are doing it as a side business, not trying to develop it into anything more than that. They're just kind of collecting the paycheck, because it's easy. Right. And they can, if you know a little bit more than your client, you can sound smart, kind of thing. Do it right or go away. Yeah. I don't mind competition. There's plenty of business for all of us. But one of the things we set out to do when we really started doing things the way we do it now is to elevate the whole industry, because it was really Wild West, and it still is in a lot of ways, but less so. I'd like to think we had a little piece of that evolution, driving that. But it really needs even further elevation to a professional status. I know that's happening. It's happening all around the country because I go visit these other places, and talk to other inspectors around the country and other multi-inspection companies, which were nearly unheard of in very recent past. And I see that it's developing more into a profession that it should be. It really should be, in order to serve those prospective clients that are looking for the services that we should be able to offer. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It's not something that somebody can just pick up a ruler and a flashlight and give you their opinion on, you know. I mean, everything is an opinion at the end of the day, maybe, but there's a professional opinion, and then there's the other one.
Right. When you first started, were you all in from the beginning on inspections, coming from your construction background or your trade background, or did you ride the fence for a little bit and now you've your advice is to yourself because you've learned your lesson from that?
That's a good question. I was all in as far as the industry or the profession went, but I struggled with, I was raising kids at the time too, so I struggled with the stability and the paycheck that I needed to provide for my family. And so I did it on the side of being an electrician, but I always did it with the mindset, this is what I want to do someday. I wanted to be the best electrician I could be while I was an electrician, but at the same time I wanted to develop this into a business, into something that I could replace anything else that I was doing if I wanted to. And I did want to. I wanted to build something that I could, hand down to my kids if possible, but my son went a different route.
That'll happen.
So it's something that I could, bring others up into. I always felt kind of a misfit. I said I chose electrical even though I was interested in all the trades because I had to pick something. My interests were always wider than they ought to be as far as making a decent paycheck goes. You could be good at a lot of things and great at nothing and not make a decent paycheck, or you can sit down and discipline yourself to be great at something, even if you're not wholeheartedly sold on this is what I want to do. Not everybody has that call, so to speak.
Right.
I didn't. I floated from the typical boyhood things. I'm going to be a fireman. I'm going to be a policeman. I'm going to be this. I'm going to be in the military. I'm going to and I did a little bit of all of those things. And when the kids came along, I thought, well, that's great. None of that fits together to do anything for me.
Yeah.
It was a great experience if I was going to be single the rest of my life. Right. But I always loved construction. I always loved real estate. And from knowing what my cousin was doing, the inspection world was always a big interest. And when you marry construction and real estate, that's kind of where you end up. If you like to serve people and like to look out for their best interests when in their, I can't be a tax attorney, so I hire a tax attorney. I can be a tax attorney, but I don't want to be a tax attorney. Right. So if I can hire a tax attorney, I don't need to know anything about the tax law if I have a good one. Same, your question earlier about, hiring a good real estate agent, or whether you can trust him or not. If you can't trust him, don't hire him. Right. You hire a real estate agent because you don't live in that world. You don't want to live in that world. You live in your own world. Whatever that world is, but you have to pick one. And so this is what I always wanted to do, and it was the best marriage of multiple interests that I could find. And it helped people at the same time, which is the most rewarding part of it. When you can save people from heartache. And ultimately, our goal is that the inspection is a lot less expensive than what we've discovered and can save them. And sometimes, like today, this morning, I had an inspection where there wasn't really much to discuss. It was a 6-year-old house and was well built, and there were just a few little things here and there that were easy fixes. So,
versus an inspection that I had the other day where a gentleman was going into a $200,000 house with no expectation of really any major repairs. And
at $200,000?
Right.
Not anymore.
Yeah. It was manufactured home.
Oh.
And so it,
a little less expensive.
A little less expensive. Yeah. And then the unfortunate news for me is that while you got a roof that needs replaced 15 years ago, and you've got a plumbing system that's failing. Yeah. And so we have to give people that bad news sometimes, but it's necessary because we're a lot less expensive than fixing those things or being surprised by those items down the road if you hadn't gotten the inspection.
Yeah, and I think, of all the team members that the person hires in a real estate transaction, we're probably the least expensive by far. I mean, we're even less on average than the appraiser.
Right. And yeah, somebody's going to have to explain that one to me. I don't.
Well, we're not saying the appraisers don't do hard work. I don't even know what they do. We spend more time on the property.
Definitely do.
You might spend more time in the office.
Yep. I guess talking a little bit more about we've been talking a lot about kind of the specifics of home inspections, the requirements, client expectations, realtor expectations. I think what a lot of people wouldn't expect about the home inspection industry, or just as home inspections as a career, how much of it is just customer service in order to be successful at it, versus the technical knowledge that there's a lot of technical knowledge required, but if you don't have any of those other personal skills, if you're not personable, then imagine things are pretty difficult. Was that always your personality? Or did it take some time to learn that lesson, that the technical knowledge couldn't get you everywhere?
As a technical person and a natural introvert, the less I could talk to people, the better. And you have to learn along the way how to talk to people, because not everybody speaks the same language, even if they're using the same words very often. And so communication is a learned thing, and it takes way too long to learn those things too often. And I enjoy talking to people when there's purpose in it, when I'm providing something to them, a service to them, I'm helping them in some way. I enjoy it then, but it's even now exhausting.
Yeah.
But
an emotional drain.
It is, and my extroverted friends are going, "What are you talking about?"
Right.
But it really can be. At the same time, it's uplifting when you know you've helped somebody, when you know you've really provided a service to somebody, and or in some cases you've saved them from something, and that's something I probably learned in the military when we did, we get to search and rescue cases, and I learned afterwards, besides the constant action aspect of it, I remember sitting down pretty early on after that, going, why did I love that so much, even though I knew I wasn't a lifelong military guy, Why did I love that so much? And it was because of serving others serving others is really serving yourself. I mean, there's nothing that makes you feel better than contributing to your community and to the world and to even just another person in a positive way,
Right.
So if you can't do that in whatever you're doing, then you're probably pretty miserable. But maybe that's just my perspective.
No, I very much agree with you. I think there's maybe part of the evolution of home inspectors in general over the years has been kind of the realization of how much that side of things matters.
Yeah.
And the further away we get from the weekend trades person who, kind of picks up home inspections on the side and hopes that their, very specific set of technical knowledge will just carry them through whatever is needed, is probably fading out to a large extent towards individuals who are more fully committed to home inspections as its own trade, so to speak. I think I've always referred to it as a gray collar job.
Gray collar.
You're working amongst the trades, but you're not necessarily within them.
You're still getting your face full of spider webs once in a while.
Right.
Don't find that in a white collar too often.
Right. But it sure beats, breaking your back up on a hot roof and 100-degree summer heat. So
I roofed my own house one year and decided I'll never do that again.
Right.
All respect to roofers.
Yeah, no kidding. We've pretty well covered where you started, where we are now. What do you think the next 10 to 15 years of home inspections looks like?
Well, I think that education is the key to the industry's success. It's continuing to grow, and it's successful, and evolving into more and more success. When I say education, it's not just the education of the inspector. I mean, that stuff is pretty well met. You can take any number of classes now, and in person or online or whatnot. There's any number of opportunities out there now that weren't there even 5 years ago and 10 years ago. It's continuing to grow and evolve. So I think the industry is going to grow in that way, but the education that I'm talking about is the education of the general public. And I think, and I kind of hope that we get to a point where clients are more predominantly shopping with some idea of what that should look like for their own inspectors, and not just reliant on the realtors. And it's not that the realtors are doing a bad job with that. I mean, realtors, if they're looking out for their client's best interest, then they're giving them references for all kinds of professions and whatever's needed, right? But the average client out there still, though they know what a home inspector is, it's not like it was 20 some years ago, where nobody knew that existed and didn't know what to ask for. They know what one is, but they don't know what they should be looking for in one. And part of that is the Wild West aspect of the industry in different locations. I mean, Texas is, I think, the most regulated. They've got a licensure, they've got their own education program, they've got all their own examinations and everything, and I think require an apprenticeship. And there are a couple other states that require some kind of ride-along, at least, not a certain number of hours of doing that. So that's growing. But in general, Joe and Jane Smith out there don't necessarily know what they should be looking for in an inspector. In Montana, we got the registration. We fell short of licensure, but we got the registration. We all hoped that would be a good thing, and that would be more accountability for a more professional inspector. But really, all it did, in my opinion, was fool the general public into thinking this person's legit now because they have a registration number.
Right.
Really, the requirements weren't any more than they ever were for belonging to any one of these national or international organizations like ASHI or INTERNACHI or whatever. Some of them don't exist anymore. I think it's pretty much just down to those two. And there's talk at the state level, as I've heard, of it going to licensure, and I don't know what that's going to look like. But the danger is, of course, it could still be just fooling the general public into thinking. The education of the general public of what a home inspector should look like. Everybody kind of knows what a plumber should look like, what an electrician should look like, blah, 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 They don't necessarily know what the end product should look like. But, I mean, there are ways to vet your professionals, right? Google reviews or word of mouth is the best one, or any of that kind of stuff. But then, of course, make sure the reference you're getting is from somebody who knows what they were looking at. Right. This is far afield from where you asked me. I think what we're going to see in the next, did you say 10 to 15 years, is more and more real estate shoppers are going to be hiring their own inspectors. And some investors, like me, I have in where I invest, I have a certain inspector that I go to, and it didn't come through any realtor. But being an inspector, having an inspection company, I kind of knew what questions to ask anymore. But I think investors are going to, they're going to want reliable, familiar people on their teams, and Joe wannabe homeowner is going to be, I think, more educated in the future about what that person should look like too. And so even if they don't need a team member beyond that one transaction, but they're going to ask better questions. I mean, right now you can get into ChatGPT. You can Google it right now. What should I ask my home inspector? Right. And if you're not a home inspector and you're looking to get one, or a commercial building inspector, and you don't know what to ask, get online and ask what you should ask. At least you have a foundation of where to start from, and then ask your realtor, of course, too. What are some other things I should be looking for? A lot of realtors now will give you a short list of merchants, inspectors, tradespeople, whatever, and say, here, you go vet them and figure it out for yourself. Right. But here's the people I like to work with, kind of thing, So I think as more realtors get to that way of doing things, more people are going to become better at vetting their own inspectors as well. So the industry has to evolve. It has to become less Wild West. I mean, there's some wonderful things about the freedom and the for the maverick, that wants to do his or her own thing, but you have to do your own thing right, or you should be held accountable. And there's going to be more and more of that. I think the record of litigation shows across the country that there is more and more of that. And so it's going to become more of a professional industry than a side job.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think that'll only benefit the end user.
And the industry itself.
Yeah. One last question. See if we can end strong on this one, then we'll kind of close things out. But what's one old school habit or mindset that you think is still worth holding on to in the modern world of home inspections?
Old school mindset particular to the industry or just in general?
You can go general if that's helpful.
Well, there's always the generational criticisms. Whatever generation you're in, you're better than the one that came before.
Right.
And the one that came behind you is a bunch of lazy asses. Right?
Right, yep.
And I mean, I read a lot. I like to read ancient stories and philosophers and such. And you hear some of those stories, you if you didn't know better, you'd think it was written yesterday. It's always been that way. So I'm hesitant to answer that because things must evolve. Things must evolve and get better, and things always have, even though every generation has been complaining about the one before and the one after. So if I were to sound like a Gen Xer to a millennial, I would say work ethic. And it's not just working for work's sake. It's working for a purpose. It's working. Get your hands dirty, metaphorically or real, but do something. Don't expect anything to come easy, because none of us deserve it to be easy. Just go do it, go get it done. And if it looks scary, jump in harder. If I could say something to myself back then, it was be afraid and do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's probably true across any generation. It may have different bases for fears, but fears are to be overcome, not crippling you. And most people, they say, don't go into business, or don't get that promotion, or don't go take that trip, or do whatever, because they're afraid of this or that or the other. I can't. I heard somebody say, it's just tone of voice, or inflection. Instead of saying, how can I do that? You say, how can I do that? I think that attitude that you were given everything you need to build off of and do whatever it is you really want to do, regardless of where you came from or where you're at. If you want to be somewhere else, go somewhere else. If you want to be something else, be someone else, go do it. I remember at 19, I was sitting there, I was working 3 jobs and had no direction, and it all kind of hit me, and I thought, the hell am I doing myself? I was only 19, but high school was over. That was what it was. It was never coming back. That's what all this hit me at the same time. I'm never going to be that guy again. I'm never going to be in those social circles again in the same way. The responsibilities have entirely shifted. Everything's changed. I need to have a direction. I need to figure out what I'm doing with my life. And with that, there were some things I sat with that I didn't like about myself, and some things I did like about myself, and some things I wanted to do better, and other things I wanted to adopt as who I am that I didn't have at the time, and so I set out to do those things. I mean, here I am, 52. I remember that very clearly because it was as a transitional moment in my life, because everything did change at that point. I started making decisions, and whether they were right or wrong, I made them and moved forward on them. And whether you call that successful or not, it was forward movement. Yeah. So keep moving forward is my advice to anybody. Keep moving forward, even if it's inch by inch, not mile by mile. Keep moving forward, whatever you want to do.
Well, thank you, Tim. Yeah, moving forward, we're going to be talking with a lot of different guests specific to our industry, but I think this episode, more than others, was a little more focused on home inspection as an industry in general, and other episodes are going to navigate more towards circumstances or issues or things that the home buyer, the realtor, the homeowner are going to be dealing with, and how we can help them navigate that or bring in somebody who can. And so
Absolutely.
looking forward to that. That's the inspection report for today, folks.